The afternoon sun poured through the stained glass windows of St. Matthew's Cathedral, creating a kaleidoscope of colors on the white roses and eager faces below. Sarah Bennett, 26, sat gracefully at the altar in her exquisite wedding dress, her blonde hair elegantly styled beneath a delicate veil, awaiting her fiancé's arrival. The guests had been seated for over an hour. The string quartet had already performed their entire set twice. Father Michael, the priest, stood patiently at the altar, stealing occasional glances toward the vestry door, where the groom was supposed to have appeared long ago. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she clutched her bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. She had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl, envisioning herself walking down this very aisle to marry the man she loved. But as the minutes dragged on, a cold certainty started to settle in her heart. Her maid of honor, Jessica, knelt beside her, tears welling up in her eyes. "Sarah, honey, maybe we should try calling his phone again." Sarah slowly shook her head, her voice barely audible. "He's not coming, Jessica. I can feel it." Just then, Sarah's father approached the altar with a somber look on his face. He had been making calls from the church vestibule, trying to reach the missing groom or anyone who might know his whereabouts. "Sweetheart," her father said gently, "I spoke with David's best man. He left a message saying he couldn't go through with the wedding. He said he wasn't ready for marriage and needed time to think." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 200 guests watched in stunned silence as Sarah covered her face with her hands, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks in a mix of humiliation and heartbreak. David Sterling, the successful investment banker she had been with for 3 years, had abandoned her at the altar without even offering a personal explanation. The man she had trusted with her future was gone when she needed him most. Father Michael stepped forward, his voice filled with compassion. "My dear friends, it seems there will be no wedding today. Life often takes unexpected turns, and our faith is tested in ways we never anticipate. Let us keep Sarah and David in our prayers during this difficult time." Sarah stood up slowly, the weight of her elegant gown feeling like a costume from a play that had been cancelled mid-performance. The sympathetic whispers from the guests rang in her ears like a loud roar as she walked down the aisle. An aisle that should have led to her new life, but instead led to heartbreak and uncertainty. 5 years later, Sarah had rebuilt her life piece by piece after that devastating day. She had channeled her pain into purpose, using the money intended for her honeymoon to launch a nonprofit that helped abandoned and at-risk children find stable homes and loving families. Her organization, Second Chances Foundation, had evolved from a small local effort into a nationally recognized charity that had transformed the lives of thousands of children. Sarah realized that her greatest strength wasn't found in being someone's wife, but in being a voice for the voiceless. On this particular autumn evening, Sarah attended a charity gala at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. As the executive director of Second Chances Foundation, she was invited to speak about their work and accept a humanitarian award for her contributions to child welfare. Sarah wore a simple yet elegant navy dress, her blonde hair now styled short with the confidence of a woman who had discovered her true purpose. The scared, abandoned bride from 5 years ago had transformed into a poised and successful woman who commanded respect in boardrooms and legislative halls. As Sarah mingled with donors and supporters before her speech, she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned around slowly, and her breath caught in her throat. David Sterling stood only a few feet away, looking exactly as she remembered him, but somehow smaller. He wore an expensive tuxedo, carrying himself with the same arrogance that had once drawn her in, but now it seemed empty and unappealing. "Sarah," David said, his voice uncertain for perhaps the first time she had ever heard it. "I heard you'd be here tonight. I wanted to talk to you." Sarah studied the man who had once held her entire future in his hands. "Hello, David. What brings you to a children's charity event? This doesn't seem like your crowd." David's face turned slightly red. "I wanted to see you. I've been following your work with the foundation. You've accomplished incredible things." "Thank you," Sarah replied calmly. "It's been fulfilling work, much more meaningful than planning weddings that never happen." David winced at her words. "Sarah, about that day. I need you to know that You need me to know what, David?" Sarah interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "That I was young and scared? That I made a mistake? That I've regretted it every day since? David nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. I was terrified of the commitment and the changes it would bring. I handled it terribly, and I've thought about you constantly since then. Sarah looked at him with the clarity that comes from years of growth and self-discovery. David, you didn't handle it badly. You handled it exactly the way you intended. You made a choice that day, and that choice revealed who you really are. But Sarah, I want to make it up to you. I want to try again. I'm ready now for marriage, the life we planned together. Sarah felt a mix of sadness and liberation as she gazed at the man who had once been the center of her dreams. David, the woman you left at that altar no longer exists. She was someone who thought her worth depended on being chosen by you. The woman standing here today knows her worth has nothing to do with being chosen by anyone. David's face grew desperate. But we were good together. We could be good again. I have more money now, more success. I could give you everything you ever wanted. Sarah smiled, not with bitterness, but with genuine pity for the man who still didn't understand what he had lost. David, you could never give me what I wanted most. What was that? David asked, confused. The ability to trust someone completely, Sarah replied. You took that from me on our wedding day, and I had to rebuild it myself. The life I have now is built on a foundation you could never provide, because you already showed that you would run when things got hard. At that moment, the gala coordinator approached to inform Sarah that it was time for her speech. As she prepared to leave, David gently grabbed her arm. Sarah, please. Can we at least have dinner? Can we talk more about this? Sarah looked down at his hand on her arm, and then back at his face. David, I forgive you for what you did. Not for your sake, but for mine. But I will never trust you again. And without trust, there is no foundation for anything meaningful. Sarah walked away from David Sterling for the second time in her life, but this time, she was the one choosing to leave. As she took the stage to accept her humanitarian award, she looked out at an audience of people who valued her work, her dedication, and her strength. 5 years ago, Sarah began, I experienced what felt like the worst day of my life. I was publicly humiliated and abandoned at the moment I was most vulnerable. But today, I stand before you to say that sometimes our greatest disasters turn out to be our greatest gifts. She paused, noticing David in the audience, his face a mix of regret and admiration. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. When life takes away what you thought you wanted, pay attention to what it gives you instead. My abandoned wedding led me to abandoned children, and in helping them find homes, I found my true home within myself. The audience erupted into applause. But Sarah was thinking of the frightened young woman in the wedding dress who had cried at that altar 5 years ago. That woman had needed David Sterling to validate her worth. The woman standing there today knew her worth didn't rely on anyone's approval or presence. After the gala, Sarah drove home to her cozy apartment, filled with photos of the children her foundation had helped, letters from grateful families, and awards recognizing her humanitarian work. She had built a life full of purpose and meaning, surrounded by people who valued her contributions to the world. David Sterling had given her the greatest gift possible by abandoning her at the altar. He had forced her to discover that she didn't need to be chosen by someone else to have value. She could choose herself. And that choice had led her to a life far richer than any marriage to him could have provided. Sometimes, Sarah reflected as she prepared for bed, the worst thing that happens to us is actually the best thing in disguise. David's abandonment had felt like the end of her story, but it had actually marked the beginning of her real life. The life where she was the author of her own happiness rather than a supporting character in someone else's drama. The woman who had once waited at an altar for a man who never came had become the woman who never waited for anyone to give her permission to live fully. And that transformation was worth far more than any wedding ring could ever.